Hey there, this is Tua, and I am back with another map review. Today we're going to be talking about Frostleaf. Accompanying this video will be another replay review of mine from the third round of the Smacky Cup 3. But today we are just going to be talking about the map because putting the map review and the replay review in the same video would end up being too long, even for me, to record in one sitting. So we're going to do these in parts. So first we're going to be talking about the map itself. Now, I've done some map reviews of maps that I think are good and I like. And today is going to be a little bit different because Frostleaf is a mess. It's really a mess. It's probably the worst big fog map I've played. I played a lot of kind of medium-sized fog maps, some good, some bad. But this one is a very large map, as you can see from just the size of the map on the screen. And it has a tremendous amount of issues. And I was really shocked when I saw some of the tags on this map because it's in the Hall of Fame and it's an S rank, supposedly an S rank map. But it's really a disaster. And so we're going to go into a lot of detail about what's wrong with this map and what this map is trying to do and why it fails to do what it's trying to do, and what kind of games it produces, and what are some of the strategic options on this map and how you should think about it. So just know that that's where we're going with this. This is going to be a little bit of a downer and maybe a little bit more cynical than some of the other map reviews. But unfortunately, when the map sucks, then that's what you get. So let's start breaking this one down. So first of all, the thing that's going to jump out to you when you look at this map is that there's a ton of water. Like, look at all this river maze in the corner up here. And so when you see something like this, it's honestly a little bit overwhelming to look at first, but it's very important that we just look at the bases and we figure out what the reinforced routes are to both sides of the map. So the first thing, I guess, after that we can notice is that the center is very empty. So there's not a lot of properties there. So really, when we're looking at the reinforces, we kind of want to look at the reinforces to let's see. So player one's down here on the bottom left. So we're going to look at player one's reinforces to the top side and to the right side. And then also for player two as well. So we're not going to worry too much about reinforcing to the middle just because it's very empty. And the reinforced paths are very different depending on whether you're going up or to the right. So let's take a look at those. So we've got 3 bases down here. And this base is the furthest over to the right, and it's going to be your primary base going to the right side. And then you have this base that is more up, that is going to be a primary reinforced towards the north. And then you have this base that's kind of in the middle. So in order to understand the reinforced pathing, let's first ignore the black boats. I know we see it over there hanging out, but let's ignore that temporarily, and let's just trace through where the units have to go if they are following a normal path, just walking along the roads and the terrain and such. So for vehicles from this base, that is going to be going up and over and then to the right. And then if you're going up to the north front, then you go out this way. So it's very, very roundabout. And similarly, from this base, you can either go up this way and follow a similar path, it's just a little bit slower, or you also have the option to go to the right this way, and then from this base, you're also going pretty straightforward along the right. There's some forests in the way and roads around it. So fortunately, all of this area here is all roads. So for quick moving units like recons, they're still going to be able to get to the front lines relatively quickly, but for tanks, it's pretty rough. And especially if you're trying to make tanks from like this base, you got to deal with this forest being in the way because it's annoyingly 5 squares away. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can't actually move in here with a tank. So that's just something to keep in mind. You're often not going to want to build tanks or anti-air or neo-tanks, I guess, out of this base, and then also send them this way because the movement is a little bit inefficient, unless you have no choice. You'd much rather build them from this base. And you can build 5 movement units from this base, and it's not going to be interrupted because you can get to here without the forests messing up your moves. Okay. As you can see, getting to the actual front is going to require a number of moves. So generally we kind of measure things in terms of tank moves, which is 6 moves. So let's just kind of do some counting here, some basic counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is 1 tank move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 2 tank moves. And then you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So your comm tower is 3 tank moves away from your base here. And you got this little forest here just to add insult to injury. So your 3 tank move line is, like here, right? So this is what is 3 tank moves away. So reinforcing your vehicles is quite slow to reach the front line. And this is the relatively unimpeded path, actually. If we're looking at this base going to the north, it's even worse. So let's count this also. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 3. All right. And then we haven't even reached the second tier of cities, and we're already at 3 moves. So I think it's roughly this is roughly the line, right, for 3 tank moves. So when it gets this far, it actually this map is not like Scavenger, where you had this diagonal line where 2 tank moves turn into 3 tank moves, and all of a sudden, like, you can't cross that line. In this map, it's just not that serious because this whole area here is in the 4 tank move area, and then this is 3 tank moves as well. And so overextending like into this large area is just it's not going to make a huge difference, because it's going to be 4 tank moves for both sides, if they're following the normal path through all of the obstacles. Okay. So that's the basis. Let's look at the other stuff on the map. So we've got airports. Let's talk about them. So we have 2 airports here. And one of these airports is really far forward. So this one is really far forward. And the nice thing about airports is they fly over all the nonsense pathing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 1 copter move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see we are already getting substantially farther in 2 copter moves than we could even get with 3 tank moves from this base. Additionally, with copters from this base, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So that is covering a lot of territory that is 4 tank moves away from your bases. So the reinforced distance with your air units is extremely fast compared with your vehicles. And so this is something that you really need to pay attention to, because air units are going to be, they're going to have a much more immediate impact on the map. And if you need to reinforce something because your opponent has more units than you expected on one of your fronts, the fastest way to reinforce things is by buying copters. And so that means that in general, the armies that you're going to be fighting with are going to be heavier on air units, because they're just the fastest way to make your army faster, or make your army stronger in a pinch. So that's going to affect the composition of units you're going to want to build, and that's going to affect how you want to allocate your income, especially when you need to reinforce the front very quickly. Okay, and lastly, we have a port down here, and this black boat can go onto this port and ferry infantry in one move from this base and 2 infantry moves from this base. So you have a infantry reinforce route to this area that is extremely fast, because the black boats can move 7. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So your black boat can go from here all the way to this shoals and unload infantry onto the mountains and onto that other shoal in one move. So this is really what makes the core of the front differences work on this map. You have very fast infantry reinforce to this side, but your vehicle reinforce to this side is really, really slow. Your vehicle reinforce to this side is a little bit faster, but obviously your infantry reinforce to this side is very, very slow, because they have to walk all the way here, unless you're using other transport units to boost them. All right. So now that we have the core deployments covered, let's look at the comm tower. The comm towers are here and here. And they are pretty safe. So this one is going to belong to player 1. And this one is going to belong to player 2. And there's some things that can happen. It's not impossible for these comm towers to flip, but it's very game dependent. And generally speaking, they are far enough back from the center of the map that they tend to be pretty safe, and you tend not to lose them unless you really get overwhelmed. Okay, so with that being said, why don't we take a moment to contest, or to talk about the contested properties in this map. So I'm going to go ahead. Well, first of all, let me just split the map based on what properties belong to each side. Okay, so it's pretty simple. These properties are going to end up belonging to player 1, because the infantry can reinforce very quickly from this black boat. And likewise, these properties are going to belong to player 2. And let me just kind of draw this line again. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and circle all the contested properties on this map. Okay, so they're all circled now. You can see that there are no circles on the map. And so this is one of the reasons why this map is terrible. There are no contested properties on this map. That's the problem. There's just no contested properties on this map. This map splits, and essentially, we'll talk a little bit more about how this map can play out in practice. But if you play this map strategically in kind of the optimal way, properties cannot flip without serious like mismanagement or discrepancies in like other areas of the game that cause that to happen. So let's talk about why there are no contested properties, and a little bit about how the game would or how the game can play out, because there's kind of two different ways that games can go on this map. So let's kind of pretend like this map is good, and we will talk about how things I think were intended to play out on this map. So the idea would be that you have very fast infantry reinforcement to take these, but your vehicle reinforce is hideous, as we discussed earlier, and likewise. So that's for player 2. So player 2 is going to get all these with the early infantry push. But then what would theoretically happen is player 2 is going to end up with a lot of vehicles coming this way, because that's the vehicle reinforces slightly faster coming this way. And then that vehicle flood would put these 3 properties in danger. And likewise, player 2 would start to... player 2 is going after these properties here. And then player 1 is going to go after these properties. And the vehicles basically push in here and thin out the fast infantry reinforce, because infantry can't really fight against a lot of vehicles. But then once you get to like this line here, then the vehicle reinforce can kind of defend against what is at this point like a super long vehicle reinforce for player 1. And then you kind of go from here, and then player 2 pushes back and tries to retake these properties, and player 1 is pushing up here trying to retake these properties, and you kind of flip those 3 back and forth, and you do the whole like front shift thing and race to kind of control those properties. So I think that's the theory of how it should work. And games can actually work like that if both players commit really heavy on vehicles to their strong side, their comm tower side, and only put infantry or put very limited resources towards their weak side. So that can happen. There is a problem. And the reason why, unfortunately, that kind of game tends not to develop if the players understand what's kind of ideal, is this port. The reality is landers are insane on this map, and landers really break the core flow of how this map ought to work. And the reason you can see this, and you can be very confident, because even though landers are a fairly large investment, there's some ways that we can look at them to kind of determine whether they're worthwhile and how much value we're going to get out of them. So first of all, I guess we can talk about the income levels on this map. So the income is 24K if the map splits down the middle. Okay, so you're going to have 24K to work with. If you build a lander from here, we talked about how like 3 tank moves is like here, right? Something like that. If you have a lander here on this port, then you can get 2 vehicles into this lander, because both of these bases can have 1 move onto the lander, and the lander can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to this shoal right here and unload vehicles here and here. And now your 1 turn tank move is here, which means your second tank move is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is here roughly. Okay, so this is 2 tank moves, and previously this was 3. So you are, by buying a lander, you are essentially reducing an entire tank move from the reinforced path of 2 of your factories. And so if this is maybe a little bit unintuitive to think about if you're trying to do like a value calculation, but essentially if you are removing a full tank move from your deploys, you are essentially adding an extra turn's worth of deploys value to your army because they can just get to the fight faster. And the amount that you're adding to the fight depends on how much value you can basically stick on your lander. So normally, if you built stuff from these factories and they came all the way to the front, well, if you built it and it was like 2 turns ago, then those units would be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they'd be like here and here maybe, right? But instead, they're like here. So these units, if they're here, they might as well not exist because they're not fighting. So if you could move those units here, and you're doing that every other turn, it's actually as if you're still net like creating army value, because the only army value that actually matters is the army that's actually fighting. Okay, so if you have like 50k of units in this area, it doesn't help you at all. If you have 50k of units here, then that's what actually matters, because that's what's actually fighting over the properties or the enemy units that need to be fought against. So anyway, because the landers reduce the reinforced path by so much, it completely negates the intent of the map, because all of a sudden all of these properties are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. So this is like all of these contested properties are 2.5 tank moves from 2 different bases, which is shorter than the supposed fast deploy speed from these 2 bases on your opponent's strong side. Because remember, the Comm Tower was the 3 tank move line, right? So actually, with the lander, these supposedly contested properties are quicker to reinforce from these bases than they are to attack from these bases. And so what that means is that they aren't actually contested properties anymore. That's what that means. The only way that they can flip is if, again, player 1 is actually just not reinforcing this way, because it is faster for player 1 to get units here than for player 2 to get units here. And if that's the case, then those properties are not flipping unless player 1 decides to ignore them. Okay. Now, you may be thinking, if I buy a lander, doesn't that make me weaker on the other side? Because if I'm spending like 12k here and I'm sending all these units up here, well, isn't that going to make me vulnerable down on my other strong side? And that is a true statement, but the answer is no, you will not be vulnerable. And there's 2 reasons why. 1, so here's the line through the center of the map roughly. So this Comm Tower is, first of all, 2 squares back. Second of all, the attack path from the opponent, if they don't have a lander, the reinforce here is like 4 tank moves. Okay. If they do have a lander, then it's like 3. But if they have a lander and you have a lander, then it doesn't really matter. There's no economic advantage or disadvantage to getting the lander. It just kind of cancels out. So, but regardless, by the time that they push to this Comm Tower, you're basically 3 tank moves away on each side. But you have the benefit of this airport that is literally like, it's right next to the freaking Comm Tower. And so if you ever get in trouble from a flood of vehicles on this side, you can just pump copters out of this airport here, and it's really, really good for stalling out any pushes that come this way. Additionally, if they don't have a lander, all their vehicle reinforcements have to go through this insanely convoluted path, and so it's really hard to get enough units to basically control this area. Because in order to control this comm tower, you really need to also control this area as well, because if any infantry, or like in this area here where I've drawn this big corner, then they're going to be able to interrupt the comm tower, and so you're not going to lose it. So you have to like make sure there's no artillery here, probably no artillery here, and no vehicles here, nothing from the airport that can come to contest. So this comm tower is insanely defensible based on the terrain. And speaking of the terrain, on the other side, this line here is also insanely defensible for player 1, because if you control the trees and the cities, these are amazing for recons. So you're going to be able to see, this whole area. So there's no way that you can really get sneak attacked as long as you kind of control your defensive line here, because you can just hide recon in the trees, and there's no way that your opponent can clear them. If they want to clear them, they're going to have to put units right next to your cities that are going to get clobbered, and it's going to be really inefficient. So it's a great defensive position to hold. So as hopefully you're beginning to get the picture, defense is really optimal on this map. And as soon as both players understand that, this map reveals itself as just a hideous mess. Because there's no contested properties, and defense is strategically optimal. So what happens is both players defend, and they stare at each other forever, because there's no reason to fight. If you fight, you're attacking either into a really strong defensive position, as we just mentioned, or you are trying to attack into a comm tower that also has a really strong defensive position, and the amount of area that you need to control to actually take this comm tower is really large, and you're pushing into an airport it's really close with really fast reinforcements. So it's really, really difficult to flip anything. Okay. So I hope that gives you an idea of how this map tends to play out. Let's go a little bit more in detail about the openers, because there are some interesting opener quirks here. So I've got this replay of Rizo versus Crawfy. And one thing you're going to see on this map is day 3 recons. Interestingly enough, Rizo doesn't go for a day 3 recon. I think that day 3 recons are the default on this map. They're basically mandatory for player 1. I think player 1 almost always has to open day 1 recon. We'll explain why in a minute. But player 2, I'd say, has an option, but it's still pretty good. I think player 2 could potentially delay to maybe day 4 or day 5. I think day 4 actually could work decently, but day 5 is maybe a little too late. It kind of depends on how you want to do it. But the idea here is player 1 is going to be sending out early infantry to get to these properties very quickly, because that's what you can do with the black boat. You can get up to here very, very quickly. And likewise, player 2 is going to be doing the same thing. And so in order to slow down the other player's capture of these quote-unquote contested properties, you want to have a recon there as quickly as possible. And there's not really a ton of risk in doing that, because tanks can't really be on the map before day 5. And even if the tanks are built, they have to go through this ridiculous reinforced route to make it all the way here. So if you day 3 recon, you're going to have 2 or 3 days where just mechanically there can be nothing out on the field to contest your recon. And so that's going to slow down the captures of these cities here. And because there's mechanically no counterplay to it, you kind of have to do it because it just ends up being really good. Even if your opponent doesn't go for these cities, then you're getting your quote unquote contested cities earlier than them, and you're denying them for as long as possible. Not that it's going to make much difference in the end, but that is the strategically optimal play in my opinion. So let's kind of zoom ahead here, and we'll see where the play comes in. So remember, player 2 has gone day 3 recon, and this is a day 4 recon. Actually, this is a great example of why I think day 3 recon is really important. So you can see now, so player 2 has started caps on both of these cities, and this recon now is here and sees both of the caps, but actually can't interrupt them. So if this had been a day 3 recon instead of a day 4 recon, then it could have interrupted at least one of these 2 caps for free. Player 1 has a little bit of a build advantage on this map because player 1 can just do what Raizo does here and get these 2 cities, and there's simply nothing that player 2 can do to contest this. Even a day 3 recon is not early enough to contest these. So player 1 is always going to get 2 out of these 3 cities for free, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do. And so I think that there's a little bit of player 1 advantage on this map, but I'll let the map makers argue over that. That's just my opinion. But player 2 will get to take like a pot shot on one of these infantries if they want to deny a little bit of income. Forcing that repair early will knock the income down by like 1,000. So if there's like a really precise build going on that could prevent that from working, especially like I think this next turn, it would have been 13k, now it's 12k, which I guess isn't really a huge deal, but if there had been like a tank last turn, then that would prevent this from being like a copter infantry turn. So there's something to think about, but it's kind of free either way. You're going to have the option to do some infantry harass, and you will see this often. You'll see an early mech pretty often on this map because this is the fastest way to get something that will counter the recon out on the map, even though I mean it's basically unthinkable for a mech to be able to surprise attack a recon on this map because the recons can see so far, the mechs can't move very far, and there's not really like a ton of hiding places that the mech could hide in. They'd have to get to like these trees, right? And by the time they get there, the recon's going to have spotted them like 2 turns ago. So it's mostly just there to force the recon to run away rather than being like a trap. But that's something that you'll see often. And then another thing that you're going to see often is you're going to see T-copters, because there's really 2 reasons why T-copters I think are a great choice on this map. One, there's a lot of potential for infantry boosting because of the rivers. And so if you can infantry boost onto a river, and it's almost like boosting 2 squares, because normally it would take an infantry 2 of the 3 movement points to get on that tile. But also the T-copter can fly over the rivers, which is quite good. And we talked about how the black boats make infantry reinforced to this side really, really fast. And similarly with other maps that have this similar kind of black boat reinforced dynamic for infantry, like Issus V2 is an example, and to some extent Quota Iota, although it's a little different because there's no port. The thing that happens is your strong side here tends to get a little bit infantry starved because oftentimes you're making vehicles out of these two factories. And so you just naturally, you're kind of sending all your infantry up to this side because it's efficient, and then you end up with not enough infantry down here. So getting a T-copter is a nice way to just be able to consistently invest in getting infantry to this side quickly. Because if you want to push, eventually, like you're going to need infantry, and you're going to be fighting into a lot of infantry because your opponent can reinforce infantry to this side very quickly with the black boat. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you get over here and then you're like, oh, I'm going to take these cities, and you start trading infantry 1 for 1, trying to push in here. Because if you trade infantry 1 for 1, trying to push in here, you're going to run out before your opponent does. Your opponent's getting potentially 2 infantry over here every other turn. And you can't keep up with that, even with a T-copter. So keep in mind that infantry trades on the strong side are not good for you. And infantry trades on the weak side are great for you. So you want to accept infantry trades on your weak side. Don't want to accept infantry trades on the strong side if you can help it. Obviously, if you're not trading 1 for 1, if you're trading for better than that, then you have to use your judgment on whether it's worthwhile to go forward with. Okay. So I think that kind of covers the basics of the opener. If for some reason you end up not doing a really early recon opener, the alternative would be something like, this is not something that was done in this game, but I think you can get like a day 5 tank, and then you can get a copter soon after. Actually, you wouldn't get the tank from that base. You get a tank probably from this base. And then this is kind of like the defensive opener, where you're gonna say like, all right, I don't want to deal with trying to fight off the recon with a mech. I'm gonna build an early tank, anticipating the day 3 recon because it's pretty much guaranteed to happen. And then I'm gonna show up with a tank and a recon, and we're just gonna push the recon away, and we're gonna let my opponent get these cities anyway because I can't really contest them forever. So I think that's an acceptable way to play, and that does tend to give you better protection in case your opponent does decide to throw all their vehicles at these cities. Oops, as I piece out of the game like a fool. I think my zoom is... All right, I gotta fix my map. Sorry. All right. Where were we? I totally forgot what we were talking about. That's good. This is great for the content, right? But yeah, so the tank can kind of push off the recon harassment, and having an early tank and an early copter on this side definitely helps prevent player 1 from getting any momentum if they try to kind of all in this side with a ton of vehicles, which is something that as we talked about earlier, like that is one of the things that you can do, and we actually kind of see that in this game. So I'm actually going to continue a little bit in this game to show you what that would look like. And we see you've got this is an anti-air even before tank. So we talked about the airports having really good reinforce. So because the airports reinforce so quickly, actually tanks are a little bit devalued on this map compared to anti-air. And the one thing you really, really, really have to make sure you avoid is you cannot be pushing in on this side and on this side without a substantial number of anti-air. I'm not talking 2, I'm talking maybe 3 or 4 potentially, because as soon as you start to make any progress on this side, your opponent's going to start spamming copters. And so if you're tank pushing, your tanks are just going to get worn down. And so if you run out of anti-air, you can't push anymore. So and you just need to keep that in mind. On this map, you're going to be wanting to build more copters and more anti-air than you would in a normal composition because the reinforces for those units are, or for the copters, are really good, and the anti-airs counter that. So down here, the recon got a little feisty. I don't even know how did that happen. What did the recon do? So I don't even know what Ryza was doing here, but I think Ryza was like, hit my recon on the city. You only have a mech here, but Crofty actually had a copter as well. So that recon got picked off. So that's kind of silly, but it's not. I mean, it's not the end of the world, right? Like that city was going to get capped eventually, and you can see now that the vehicles are starting to build up here a little bit, and actually, Ryzo's got like a bunch of vehicles down here, so you can kind of see that the vehicles are starting to build up on each side. So both of the players are committing to offense, which is, I guess, one of the more interesting ways that this game can go. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. So you can see this defensive line, right? So Crofty doesn't even have any recons here. The one tough thing about this side for player 2 is that the reinforced route for recons is like really, really slow, and there's a ton of unfriendly recon terrain around here. So actually, like, getting a recon over here is pretty brutal unless you have a lander. So that is the one downside for recons. Like, this is a great line to have recons in, but if you don't have a lander, then reinforcing them there is pretty slow. And so this is like a T-copter push to the supposedly contestable cities. And so you can see here that this is a pretty strong attack, and because our player 1 is essentially only put infantry on this side, there's not really a way for player 1 to defend against this army, because there's just no vehicles, and the mechs cannot deal with this by themselves. So so I think player 1's going to put themselves in a rough position here, but you'll see now that there's a lander, all of a sudden, surprise, medium tank. And so let's see how long it takes for player 1 to reverse the tide of this attack now that there's a lander sending in vehicles. So we're just going to kind of skip ahead. So we got some reinforces. Here's a pretty strong position for player 1, right? Like, we got a full infantry wall, got an artillery, copter, tank in the forest, anti-air, a bunch of copters. The copter spam is really real. Let's see if Crofty can really overwhelm player 1 here. And even though player 1 has the lander and has got like a medium tank, let's see how this turns out. Maybe this map can actually be dynamic. Psych. So big attack here, trading, and then Winter Fury. And we'll kind of skip ahead and retreat. So, yep. So even though player 2 had kind of like an advantage here in the fight, traded infantry for infantry and ran out of infantry. Right, you can see there's only 3 infantry left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 3 against 9 infantry. Obviously, this infantry is going to die. So, yeah. So, did manage to get these 2 cities, though. So, that's pretty good. But after some fighting, balance is restored, right? So, and now Crofty also has a lander. So now Crofty is like, okay, well, I lost my advantage over here. So now let me try to push in for the Comm Tower. Because if you gotta, if I'm weak on this side, then I should be strong on the other side, so I'll go in there. So let's see how that goes. More Winter Furying. It actually manages to get a good hold on this area, but at the same time also has to kind of give up this area. So they actually managed to trade Comm Towers eventually here, which is pretty rare. So Raizo played very defensively, but I think Raizo was very committed to getting this Comm Tower, and as long as you trade, it's kind of okay. But you can see here, like 3 anti-airs, and even then, this stuff is starting to get worn down. Another Winter Fury. Actually, Coffee managed to get these 2 cities. This is very rare for any of these cities to flip. To be able to control past the Comm Tower here is extremely unusual. But because they both committed really hard on kind of the opposite sides of each other, that sometimes you can push into areas that aren't normally contested when you just don't really commit a lot to the other side. But you can see it's flipping back here, and yeah. Draw. Because after all that, it's like 1 property difference, but Raizo is going to get this property back, and this one back, and Raizo is definitely going to lose this one. And it's just going to flip back into the default state, and they're going to be doing the same thing again. So this is what happens on this map. Both players end up getting landers, and then the game draws. That's just how it goes. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you build a map with no contested properties. You just end up with draws, because how can you win? The only way you can win is if you substantially outfight your opponent. But it's really difficult to do, and if both players commit to any sort of defensive play at all, then even the amount of pushing that we saw in this replay won't actually get anywhere. Let's see. So really quickly, take a look at this other replay. This is Tordred against a Chinese player whose name cannot be rendered by the character set here. So this game is a little bit unusual in that this is what can happen when you're all in the strong side, and then you don't ever commit to defending your weak side at any point. You just forget the weak side. I'm just going to take the strong side faster than my opponent can take my strong side. So neither player committing to any defense at all. You get games like this, where you see, so player 1 is crushing all these infantry because there's no units down here, and all the vehicles are here instead. So it looks like there is at least a little bit of defense with the lander here. But player 1 is not really seriously reinforcing the side. And basically what happens here is it turns into an HQ race. But you can see the person who got the lander was able to delay longer. So lander's pretty strong. And it is difficult to defend this area if you do not build a lander. So it's not really a secret to me what went wrong for Tordred in this game. Because if you're trying to run all your units through the maze, then it's really slow. So that was a game. Okay, so let's kind of get to the end of this map review. I think I've said most of my piece here. Actually, why don't we talk about COs? We haven't talked really about COs yet. For the tournament, this map was the new tier 2, which is essentially Olaf, Eagle, Von Bolt. I think that's pretty much it, right? At least the ones that are more viable. I think everybody has picked Olaf so far, which makes a lot of sense because the map can stall very easily, and the map should stall if you're playing it right. I do actually think Eagle could potentially be viable. I saw one replay where it was pretty rough for Eagle, but I'm not completely sure that Eagle played it correctly. So there might be something to trying Eagle on this map and just deliberately playing like a really defensive style with a lander and waiting till day 20 or 22 before allowing any kind of fight. That could be an interesting experiment to try. So something to consider. I don't think Von Bolt is very good on this map because Von Bolt in tier 2 really relies heavily on using the superior brawling with the infantry defense that he gets, that 10% defense. It's very hard to bully your opponent to the point where you can actually you can hold this line of properties here. Like I don't think Von Bolt can win the early game strong enough to hold all 3 of these, or even 2 of those, and then also hold these at the same time. I think that's asking a whole lot, and if Von Bolt ends up with a half split, then what tends to happen is the superpowers of either Eagle or Olaf just makes the fight really, really difficult for Von Bolt to win. So not really feeling Von Bolt in this map, but for tier 2, certainly Olaf or Eagle. For tier 1, Sasha could potentially be pretty good. Hawk is certainly good global damage on a map like this that is likely to stall. Very good, although the income is kind of right at the edge of the Sasha sweet spot. 24k is like maybe 1 or 2 properties more than you'd like if you're Sasha, but the additional income early on can actually make it viable to try and threaten these, although I kind of tried it once and I didn't have a huge amount of success, so I don't even think the income advantage is necessarily enough to seriously threaten these properties, even if you all in them, if your opponent is playing a competent defense, just because these properties, it's so difficult to actually contest them if they're being defended. As far as tier 2 is concerned, I think you can either play Drake or Andy. I think that's really your only options. Pretty good Andy map, honestly, because there's a lot of potential for like a lot of big infantry fights and really grindy tank fights, like a ton of copters that are going to take damage and things like that. So Andy can often get a lot of value out of games like that. And then Drake, obviously, global damage. It's good. It's easy to use. Pretty strong. And then for tier 1, boy, I almost wonder if maybe Adder could be a pretty good CO on this map. because you tend to have a lot of infantry fighting and a lot of copter fights, and Adder tends to be really good at that. And the tank fighting aspect of this map, just it's not really a tank brawl map. It really isn't. So I kind of feel Adder on this map. I think Jake could be good as well. Obviously, a lot of grass in the center of the map. So that's probably how I'd break down the COs. So again, to recap, Tier 4, Adder or Jake. Tier 3, Drake, Andy. Tier 2, Olaf or maybe Eagle. And Tier 1, Sasha and Hawk. This is probably not a Sturm map. I haven't really thought about the Tier 1 that much, but yeah, I'm going to stick with Sasha or Hawk for Tier 1. So that's your COs. And lastly, before I wrap this video up, I want to talk about what you could do to fix this map, because this map is brutal. And I don't think it's fair for me to complain about all the things that are wrong with this map without actually giving some suggestions on how it could be fixed. So I will provide 2 suggestions that I think, well, really 3 suggestions actually, that could, I think, go a long way towards making this map better. So the first thing, this map should never be played without a day limit. Even in Global League. Like, the idea of playing this map without a day limit is absolute torture. And you shouldn't do it. So make sure you're always playing this with a day limit. I know for Global League, that's not really necessarily an option, but I mean, I guess you can mutual draw, right? So I think day limit is really necessary, because otherwise there's no hope for the game ever resolving itself, unless, you know, either one player fights like way better than the other, or there's just like there's no commitment to defense on one side, and so it turns into like a base race, something like that. So really hard for a game to end otherwise. So yeah, so having a day limit, I think this map could really use one extra property. Maybe you can remove one and add one. I think this corner tile could be a really good place for a city. And if you don't want to do a city, since you ideally are playing with a day limit on this, I think this area would be really good for a lab, because actually controlling both of these corners is actually viable if you are winning the position wars. And so that would give something to fight over if the game stalls out. And it's a pretty viable thing to take. So I think that can make the map a lot more dynamic. Alternatively, I mean, the center is just totally vacant of anything. And so if you don't want to put a lab in the corner, I would maybe think putting either like labs here or labs here, something like that. It's a little bit unfortunate that there's no like center tile to put like one lab in the middle, because I think that would be ideal, but then you'd have to make the map wider or taller and wider. So I think that would require too much of a rework. But so I think adding labs would go great with a day limit, and there's some decent places to put them. And then the last thing that I think could make this map better is just remove the port. Just get rid of the port. And that way you don't have to worry about the lander being too strong. And also, you can turn this port into a shoal, basically. And then you also have that kind of the quota iota mechanic, where your black boat gives you decent infantry reinforce to this side, but it's temporary unless you build an APC to refuel your black boat. And so if you do that, then I think you end up with something much closer to the original intended purpose of this map, where you have a lot of back and forth between this line of properties and this line of properties, with the potential for base races where this can end up captured if you don't commit to a defense. So those are my suggestions for this map. Let me know if you agree, disagree, and obviously I think my read on this map is substantially more spicy than my reads on some of the other maps. So feel free to let me know what you think in the comments if you made it this far. And if you have made it this far and you have not checked out the accompanying replay review, then make sure you do check that out. I will be going into pretty good detail in my Smacky Cup 3 round 3 Olaf mirror on this map, so I will be able to back up my my smack talk with some concrete examples of a really exciting game. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I've been Alagatua, and I hope you have a lovely evening.